Liberty in our lifetimes in a free state of our own. That's the vision. That's the dream. And we are building it in New Hampshire. I'm Eric Brakey, your host and renegade statesman for the Porcupine Report. Welcome to your source for porcupine news and free-range conversation on matters of liberty. All right, let's hop into the show. Hello and welcome everyone to episode 29 of the Porcupine Report. I am, as always, your host, your renegade statesman, your executive director of the Free State Project, coming to you live. We've been experimenting lately with some live episodes of the show. So we are coming, in fact, live Wednesday at 7 o'clock p.m. We are always putting out a new episode every single Wednesday, but these last two, this one and last week, it's been live. You know what I enjoyed about the live stream last week was that comments and questions were coming in. So if you are watching live and you have any questions, comments you want to share during the live broadcast, go ahead and throw them into whatever medium you're watching this on, Facebook or on X or YouTube or wherever. We're recording this on StreamYard, and it does a pretty good job of funneling all those comments to us. Where I can see it in our platform here. So I'll be watching the comments. If you've got a good question, throw it our way, and maybe we'll get a chance to ask it and discuss it. A few things before we get into the rest of the show. For those of you watching the video, your first instinct may have been, who the hell is this guy? Where's our regular host, our renegade statesman, Eric Brakey? I did, in fact, shave. I know the beard has become like part of my image a lot, but occasionally I feel like I just got to shave the thing to remind myself what I look like underneath it. And then I remember why I grew the beard in the first place, because I've got such a baby face. People always think I'm much younger than I am. So anyway, I think I'm going to be clean shaven for a little while, maybe until No Shave November. But anyway, apologies for the confusion if you were wondering where your regular host went. I will say I did appreciate, this past weekend, it was my 36th birthday. Maybe I'm starting to feel a little old. That's why I had to get that baby face back. But it's my 36th birthday, and my wife and I went out to this living history museum in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, because she's a New Hampshire native. And of course, I'm not. I'm moving over from Maine. I'm still in process, and I'm loving the state so far. But she said she will make sure that I know my New Hampshire history that she had to learn over 13 years in the New Hampshire schools. So thank you to her for a wonderful birthday and for teaching me some New Hampshire history. Great history here in New Hampshire, all the way back from the Revolution and even before. Last thing to promote before we get to our interview for this week's episode is, again, September 1st in Durham, New Hampshire, will be the Free State Blockchain Digital Asset Conference. I will be speaking there. Many other great people will be speaking there. This is hosted by Bruce Fenton, who's a very well-known and respected individual in the cryptocurrency world. And he and his family and his business are based right here in New Hampshire because, of course, New Hampshire is the cradle of cryptocurrency and Bitcoin. And anyway, so that's why it makes sense that the Free State Blockchain Digital Asset Conference is going to be right here, September 1st, Durham, New Hampshire. And you can register and get a ticket, and the tickets are very affordable. I think in fact, in the past, they were completely free, but they only started charging at all because there is limited space, right? And sometimes people get a ticket and they don't show up. So you make them pay a little bit to make sure that people are actually going to come when they get a ticket and take one of those slots. So there's limited space. Hope you get a ticket. Come out and join us in Durham, New Hampshire for great conversations on one of the most innovative areas in the liberty world, the world of of cryptocurrency. All right, September 1st. See you there. blockchainnh.com. All right. And for our conversation, our free range conversation for today's show, I will say our guest who is about to come on, I had the pleasure. He's made a few visits to New Hampshire over the last year or so, at least as I've been integrated into New Hampshire. I've bumped into him a few times because he's been busy campaigning in many different respects. And this past Monday, actually, he was coming through my area. We had the opportunity to sit down at a local restaurant and enjoy some food and some conversation and get to know each other a little bit better. And I've learned that this is an interesting individual, someone who's seen and done interesting things in the fight for liberty over his times. And we'll be talking a little bit about that. His name is ter Maat. He is the current vice presidential candidate under the Libertarian Party ticket for vice president of the United States. Prior to that, he ran for the presidential slot in this cycle, ended up with the VP slot. And also, this wasn't his first foray into politics. He ran for Congress in Florida in a 2022 special election. We'll talk about all those experiences, past and current, and also it's worth knowing, we always focus on people's political work. Those of us who care about politics, that's what we often think about. But I think it's worth knowing too that he taught economics at 3 universities. He's very well versed in Austrian economics, so there might be a lot of stuff to talk about. So let's welcome to the show ter Maat. Mike, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Eric. It's good to see you for a change. Happy belated birthday. It was great to see you the other day, and I'm glad that you're settling into New Hampshire. I want your audience, especially your constituents, to know that you did, as you point out, dutifully invite me to move to New Hampshire. I did, as I promised you. I came home and pitched the idea to Nancy, and to a slight amount of surprise on my part, she didn't reject the idea. I mean, she actually thought about it, and I think you may have her on the ropes. I think there's a decent chance of us giving this some serious consideration a couple years from now.
All right. Well, I'm glad to plant that seed in both of your minds. And, it took an entire decade of people pestering me to move to New Hampshire before I ended up doing it. It took a while for me to take it seriously and realize, something really unique is being built here in New Hampshire, and it's time to be a part of it. Mike, let me ask you, before we get into everything else, any advice for 36 years old, having just turned 36? What advice would you give to yourself at 36 years old?
A couple of number one, you are extremely young. And at 36, it's hard to remember that, right? Because you've done 30, you're no longer 29, you're approaching 40, which sounds like a big number. It's not. And my advice to any 36-year-old, including you, by the way, my running mate Chase Oliver is only 39. I would give him similar advice, which is, remember that you're young. Remember that you're going to go through all kinds of crazy changes over the next 40, 50, 60, 70 years. You have a long, not only life ahead of you, but a long career ahead of you. So keep preparing for the future, because it's twice as long as what's behind you. And of course, I wish you all the luck, but you seem like you don't need luck. You just need the energy to keep up with yourself, because you're already on the fly doing great things. You are a renegade, which I love, but keep being a renegade. You can be a renegade at 63 like I am, not just 36. And I figure I've got decades of career ahead of me. So you've got the better part. Think about this. You've got the better part of a century ahead of you in terms of career alone.
Well, it's good to keep in mind. I will say, earlier this month, I went to the Young Americans for Liberty National Convention, which I used to be their national spokesperson, did a lot of work there. I love Young Americans for Liberty, but it's one of the first times going to that national convention. I kind of feel like I'm no longer a Young American for Liberty. I've hit the beginning stage of middle age.
You're twice as old as some of those members.
I know. I'm talking with some of these 20-somethings. It's like, boy, they were born after 9/11. It's kind of hard to imagine, but yet they're what the world before 9/11 that they weren't able to see, and how much the world has changed. And yet some of these young people, they give me as the beginning or early onset stages of being a middle-aged American for liberty gives me hope that the next generation, there are good people fighting in every single generation, including old folks like you, Mike.
I love that. It is true that hanging out with them will make you feel both simultaneously young, because you do fit in with them better than you might think, and old when you realize that you are double their age in some cases.
Yeah.
But, hang out with me once in a while. I'll make sure you continue to feel young.
Yeah. So there's a lot of things we could talk about. First, I want to say I see a comment from Richard King, says greetings and salutations. Greetings and salutations to you, Richard. Thank you for watching. And a good reminder for folks watching live, throw your comments and questions and join the conversation. And we may address them during the broadcast. So obviously, you are currently the Libertarian Party's vice presidential nominee. So you are there with J.D. Vance and Walls. I forget his first name. The guy from Minnesota.
Tim Walz.
Tim Walz. So they're your rivals
from Minnesota.
What do you? I mean, everyone talks about the presidential candidates. I'm curious, as a vice presidential candidate, what you make of your rivals for the vice presidency.
They are a couple of pieces of work, and I mean that as lovingly as possible. Tim Walz is the guy who said, I'll probably get this wrong, but paraphrasing, one man's socialism is another man's neighborliness.
He did say that.
He did say that. As a matter of fact, I may have gotten that quote right, but it's darn close, if not on the head. I think that should send shivers up one's spine. That is a deeply, profoundly, fundamentally, classically problematic statement. Once in a while, my neighbors have problems with me because, I'm noisy and ugly. But, we don't go around taking each other's stuff, right?
Yeah, you might go over and ask to borrow a lawnmower or something, but you don't get to just say, you have a lawnmower, I don't have one, therefore,
you've got two. That's not fair. I get to take one of them. And by the way, Thursday at 3, you're cutting my grass. That's what socialism is, right? Socialism is all about this idea that for some reason, some people think that they have a right to make decisions about how to use other people's stuff, including taking it and depriving them of their own ability to use their own stuff. That's what fundamentally, that's what socialism is. I recognize that it's motivated by the idea that, the government making decisions for us is going to make us better off. But even more fundamentally than that, it is the idea that someone has the right to take your stuff. That's not neighborliness, nor is neighborliness the idea that you can make decisions for your neighbor that are better for him than he can make himself. Now, in the case of some of my neighbors, I probably could make some pretty good decisions for them. I've got a neighbor who recently refinished her garage in a way that I'm not really crazy about. I might leave her a note and tell her to paint that sucker yellow. But, the idea of my neighbors telling me how to live my life, I think that's a problem. I think that's a real problem.
Well, it's ironic considering Tim Walz, I think, I saw some people really excited about something he said at one of these rallies where he said, we just want to leave people alone. Like, can't we just leave people alone and respect people's choices? And it's ironic, I guess, when you peel back apparently the stories of just how much of a COVID tyrant he was. Seen videos of police in Minnesota under his command, like ordering people off their front porches into their homes and shooting them with like paintball guns. Like it's and
offering some sort of remuneration or compensation, some sort of a reward for turning in your neighbor if they were not behaving by the rules. He wanted incentives to do that, which, boy, that sounded, let's not even go there.
Very 1984.
Yeah, it was really horrible. No, he's not the kind of guy who believes in leaving people alone. He's not the kind of guy who believes in what Americans would classically refer to as neighborliness. That's just not who he is. And this idea of trying to revamp his image, more power to them. At least they recognize that his image and his reputation stinks, and that it needs a dose of dishonesty to refurbish it. At least they recognize that. But this is a guy who's deeply committed to the idea of collectivist ideas, socialistic decision making. And it is true that the vice presidential nominee is not terribly important. I think I'm front and center example A of that. Nobody really cares what I say, Eric.
I care what you say, Mike.
No, the only reason I'm on this show is for people to hear your opinions. Don't even tease me about it. Nobody cares what Mike ter Maat has to say. But what really makes it important is that this is the first major decision that we have seen Kamala Harris make. And she has selected a guy who is a socialist. And I think that that's a weird thing. Even if she were a socialist herself, and I would probably argue that she is at her core, but setting that aside just for a moment, if that were true, you might think that for the sake of balancing her image or refurbishing her own image, she would have selected someone who is not known as a socialist, right? There are people inside the Democratic Party who do a much better job of paying lip service to market forces. Not a great job, but there are people who do a better job than Tim Walz, right? But she passed up that opportunity, and I think that speaks volumes.
I wonder sometimes, and I know Dave Smith has, I think, made this observation to some degree with the Tim Walz pick, that at very least, Tim Walz is clearly embraces socialism in a way that is should be uncomfortable to anyone who cares about liberty. In the same way that we should be uncomfortable about a Bernie Sanders anywhere near kind of the levers of power. But at least from the perspective of campaigning and like speaking to people on the issues, at least like the socialists compared to like the corporate Democrats, like the corporate Democrats have been like talking about what, January 6th, DEI, and just all the kind of racial politics and everything else,
right?
And ignoring kind of the economic issues that people are actually struggling with, the things that people outside of Washington D.C. actually care about. Whereas Tim Walz, like Bernie Sanders, at least they talk about healthcare, they talk about economic issues. The solutions they come up with are the worst solutions you could dream up. I mean, and it's scary to hear folks on this ticket. I mean, Kamala Harris now has come out and said, right, the solution to prices going up on everything is price caps. We're going to go after the price gougers because it's not the Federal Reserve printing trillions of dollars out of thin air. It's like mom and pop businesses that are just being greedy and charging.
And to be fair, Eric, that's actually a step up for Kamala. Now at least she knows what inflation is. Now she's actually focused on it, realizes the problem. She understands that people are pissed off. That's actually a step in, of advancement for her. The fact that she bumped into the wrong solution is a real shame. But to your point, if the Democratic Party, I worry about the Democratic Party very much because I think it's in America's interest for the Democratic Party to be intellectually a little bit healthier, perhaps more like it used to be. But if your only choices are people who don't pay attention to economics and people who just absolutely get it 180 degrees wrong, I think that party's in big trouble. I don't necessarily think that that's a good thing for the United States.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, we've been talking about your Democratic opponent for vice president. I'd love to hear your perspective on your Republican opponent for vice president, J.D. Vance, senator from Ohio.
Well, to be honest, as a woman with no children and plenty of cats, I'm a little offended, to tell you the truth. I think that statement he made bothers me. It bothers my kids. It bothers my dogs, and it bothers my wife. And I think that he ought not to make statements like this. I think that that's a little bit goofy. I'm heartened to hear that they had to go back a couple of years to find such stupidity, but one ought not to be making such stupid remarks, within say 40 or 50 years of running for public office of any sort. So that's a bit of a disappointment. The other thing is that it strikes me, again, nobody really cares who the vice presidential nominee is, even in J.D. Vance's case, even if he is sort of an interesting character. He's only, barely more interesting than Mike ter Maat. I mean, he's not setting the bar that high. But it does speak volumes, once again, about the important nature of decisions made by the presidential candidate. Donald Trump has picked someone who thinks a great deal like he does, who's not committed to free markets, who's not committed to free trade, who's actually committed against free trade, I think that you might argue. Someone who doesn't seem to be committed to a particular style of foreign policy. These are people, you wouldn't call them neocons, but they are certainly not in the mold of what I would consider a libertarian. They're not out there railing against the projection of military power. They don't seem to have a deep problem with the military-industrial complex. They don't seem to be particularly aware of the extent to which the CIA is calling the shots inside our foreign policy, which is not totality, but the information complex inside our defense apparatus wields enormous power and is fundamentally problematic. I just don't see these folks talking about those issues. And I think that that's a real shame, because Trump had an opportunity to pick someone who, again, would have rounded out the ticket, would have offset some of his own personal deficiencies. No matter how much you love Donald Trump, you have to admit that there are certain flaws, imperfections, weaknesses, deficiencies, like all of us, I know by which I speak. And you would hope that he would recognize those in himself and pick someone who offset that, and didn't.
Yeah, I wonder to what degree, right after the assassination attempt, he was really persuaded by those around him and said, you need someone whose assassination insurance, who's the deep state's not going to prefer over you. And certainly, it does seem like a real concern if you were to pick a Nikki Haley.
Well, then he would have picked me, Eric.
Yeah.
Or he would have picked you.
Yeah, or Vivek Ramaswamy, or Tulsi Gabbard, or Rand Paul, or there's any number of people. I mean,
you're exactly right. Vivek would have been a great pick if that's what your main concern was, or one of your main concerns, right? The deep state wants no part of Vivek.
Oh yeah. I think there are a number of folks who've come along who would be right. You want to have someone in the VP slot who is if you're going to go after the deep state in a real way, you want someone in the VP slot who is as big a threat to them, if not more a threat to them.
That's exactly right. Now, if you want to make nice with these folks and you don't care about that sort of thing, he could have picked Tim Walz.
I suppose he could have. Well, and I will say with JD, I think I agree with your assessment that, certainly on like economics and markets and protectionism, I mean, I suppose he's in alignment with kind of Donald Trump on a lot of these things, which certainly it does feel like a step in the wrong direction for the Republican Party from where they had been previously. But also the Republican Party on foreign policy had been in such a terrible place previously with the neoconservatives running things that I suppose, there's a part of me, if I look for a silver lining in things, I think, well, okay, there's no neoconservative on the Republican ticket.
He didn't pick Nikki.
Right. He didn't pick Nikki. He didn't pick Marco Rubio. He didn't pick any number of the names that the neoconservatives really wanted as the second there. And so it does seem to me a little bit, I guess I get a little joy out of watching the fall of the neoconservatives and their loss, though it sounds like they're going to be in the administration. There's rumors about Mike Pompeo being Secretary of Defense, which would be awful. But that does represent a demotion for the neoconservatives. Whereas I know that Donald Trump, when he came to the Libertarian Party National Convention, which I know a lot of people had all kinds of feelings about. I don't know where you were on things, but I know he did say that if he could bring libertarians into his coalition, he'd put a libertarian in the cabinet, which would be a promotion for libertarians as the neocons are demoted to the cabinet. I suppose, what do you make of that? And
he did say that, and I immediately thought of you and thought that you and I are going to be wrestling to see who gets that one spot. I'm sorry, it's only one spot, and I got to tell you up front, in Washington, there's an old saying: a true friend is someone who will stab you in the chest.
Yeah.
So I'm telling you today, I'm gonna come after you. I'm not letting you beat me out for that one slot.
All right.
Look,
as soon as Trump wins, you and I will run smear campaigns against each other for that.
Absolutely.
Who's going to be Secretary of Transportation and be
you
the
do
Libertarian
seem
in charge
like
of the
you
road.
don't have too many skeletons in that closet, so I might have to make stuff up, But that's
only 36 years of skeletons. I got time for many more.
Yes, you do, and that's what I mean about having time ahead of you. Look, Nancy and I were sitting in that speech, watching the Donald, right? And this is when Nancy leans over and says to me that it feels a little weird, right? It feels a little creepy. Like, I'm not sure we should be here. Now, you might think that we would have given this all sorts, enormous numbers of hours of thought in advance. And of course, we had discussed every which way from Sunday, discussing him being there. But at no point did we anticipate on a personal level how it would feel to sit there during the speech. And it occurred to me, and I said, you're right. And, it was like 6 or 7 o'clock at night, which means it's time for my fourth lunch. So we got up and left. And Jim Turney, my good buddy and our campaign manager, recorded it, and it got substantial play on Twitter, which, is always fun. But it just goes to show you the things that you plan for Twitter never work as well as the stuff that you just don't plan at all, and that turned out to be your wife's idea in the first place, right? So I got to say, I missed the back end of the speech. I know that he mentioned he was warm to the idea to free Ross Ulbricht, which, it's better than him not saying it. It's better than him saying that he won't. It's one of those things that goes in the category of I'll believe it when I see it. And it did feel contrived, right? It doesn't feel like it comes from the heart. It feels like he's just looking for a few votes.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think that's the case. I don't think it's that Donald Trump has a great sense of injustice in terms of what happened to Ross Ulbricht. He certainly has a great sense of injustice to what they've done to him, which is an injustice. So I suppose he has right to feel injustice about it. I wish that extended in a heartfelt way to folks like Ross Ulbricht and Julian Assange. And
I suspect he feels much stronger about pardoning himself than he does about Julian Assange or Ross.
At the same time, I always kind of go back to of what is it? I always attribute this to Morton Blackwell, but someone else may have said it before him. But he talks about kind of political strategy of we can try all we can to get the right people, to get the Mike ter Maats of the world into all the right positions, to do all the right things because it's what's in their heart of hearts, to stand for liberty. Or we can shape the political environment around the wrong people to make it politically expedient for them to do the right thing. And I think kind of that's the question with Donald Trump is the political environment around him being shaped in such a way that he needs libertarians to get across the finish line, and a promise he makes to libertarians like signing a piece of paper to free one of our political prisoners, whether it comes from the heart or not. I suppose the question is, will it happen?
You're exactly right. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. And it is true, the latter is more important than the former in the big fight between, getting the right people or getting the wrong people to do the right thing. Look, I have long said that politicians are not leaders. Politicians are followers. Donald Trump is, he's got a few leaderly qualities. Good for him. I do like the fact that he has anti-establishment instincts, right? It's better than having pro-establishment instincts like Tim Walz. So that's a good thing. And he's got enough leadership in him to at least believe in his own ideas. And so to the extent to which those ideas reflect those instincts, that's all good. But regarding everything else, we need to, just like any politician, we need to beat them into it. And that's what the movement is all about, right?
Yeah. Well, let's go backwards in time a little bit, because I'd like to know a little bit more, and I think probably the audience would like to know a little bit more about you, Mike. and kind of how you found yourself in this position as the LP vice presidential candidate. I know that, as I mentioned in your introduction, you've taught economics at several universities. This is not your first run for office. You made a run for Congress in Florida in 2022. I guess maybe let's start there. Like Congress in 2022. This was your first time running for office, but
absolutely, indeed, it's probably more accurate to say 2021. Alcee Hastings, the great Democratic congressperson representing District 20 in what was at the time, the fourth bluest district in the United States, passed away in office. Governor DeSantis just puts off the election, just puts it off and puts it off and puts it off. Indeed, we had Mike ter Maat 2021 as our website until he decided to put it off all the way until January. And all of a sudden we had to change our website to 2022, which was a weird thing. So we campaigned for a long time, got our message out, a million contacts, including electronic contacts, and passing out literally thousands and thousands and thousands of pieces of literature in Walmart parking lots and knocking on doors. I know you have no idea what I'm talking about. I know.
I never knocked on a door a day in my life. I have no idea.
Exactly. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure you're one of the guys I chased down with a flyer in the parking lot. and so it was, a real eye-opening learning experience that it's possible to do pretty well with certain newspapers, and they're just not going to support you. It's interesting that you can do pretty well with certain reporters on a personal basis, and they're just not going to write about you. And it's interesting to know that you really can get your message out and get virtually no votes at all. It was all about the Democratic primary. And it was interesting to learn that the value of the Libertarian Party brand really is approximately zero. There are people who say, maybe they only say this to hurt my feelings, but there are people who say that you can get more votes as an independent in a lot of places than you could as a member of the Libertarian Party. That's a fairly weird thing. But I'm not sure that they're wrong, and at least not in every case. But you do learn that you spend enormous amounts of time explaining the Libertarian Party, explaining libertarianism. People, even the people who have heard of either one of those, don't, and for the most part, don't have a good grasp of what that implies. And the media was all about the Democratic primary. As a matter of fact, I think I've mentioned this to you before. When Sheila Sherfless McCormick won the Democratic primary, she immediately went to Washington. She didn't even stick around to do any real campaigning between the primary and the election.
She just figured she would go get her desk ready and wait
pick out the drapes. She had a meeting with Nancy Pelosi. I want to say like on the third day or so after the primary in Washington. Just, ready to, on some level, good for her, right?
It sounds like she wasn't wrong, right? It was.
I don't know. I mean, she didn't do any campaigning and took like 80% of the vote.
Yeah.
North of 80%. No, yeah. It was really something. And that's, it's just one of those things that to hear it described, none of this is news, right? There's no one in your audience who is falling off of a chair as we speak over this description, but it impresses certain things on you that you would have known as, intellectually, this on paper. But when you experience it with your own 2 feet, your own 2 hands, and your own 2 ears and eyes, it really leaves an impression on you. And I would say that, that's what a lot of politics is about, is executing on ideas that a lot of people could describe. But until you actually go hand to hand, passing your ideas forward, you really don't know what works and what doesn't, and what's a waste of time and what is worth the effort.
Well, now you you've taught economics for many years, and I know you. I didn't see the details. I was looking on your website, but you served in a role in some White House somewhere along the way.
Yeah. I'm sure it was before you were born. I worked for the Herbert Walker Bush White House for a couple of years. I was an economist.
I was born, but I was my
This
first.
was 90, 91, 92.
Yeah, I was finishing preschool about then.
Excellent. And I was doing my level best to cut funding from the federal government for your preschool. I just want you to know that. Yours in particular, as a matter of fact, I figured you could.
I don't know. I've never asked my parents, and I wasn't smart enough at the time to ask them the details, but I think it may have been a private preschool.
No, it probably was. But I would have cut funding to that too, given the opportunity.
All right.
Look, I was in the Office of Management and Budget. I was a low-level economist, and I can tell you, my boss's 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 boss was the President of the United States. So it's not like we were having tea and crumpets in the Oval Office while he asked my advice about the big picture. That's not at all the experience I had. And then I campaigned for his reelection. We lost, of course. Bill Clinton won that reelection. George Herbert Walker Bush was the guy who, some of your audience may remember from their history books, is the guy who said when Congress comes asking for new taxes, he'll say, "Read my lips, no new taxes." And of course, he ended up having to go back on that pledge, which was a big deal. I think it was a big deal for the Republican Party. I think it was a huge deal for him and his subsequent campaign. I think it was a big deal for relative youngsters like myself. I was 30, right? Yeah. Or so. I was 31 during the campaign. Maybe I was 29 when he went back on his pledge. For a fiscally conservative young economist, that's a big deal. It's the reason I joined the Republican Party, is the idea of free markets, a regulatory environment that was light of touch, pro-growth, pro-business economic environment, free trade. And I just got the impression after that the party was starting to go away from some of those fundamentals. I didn't register as a libertarian until many, many years later. It was 2011 or so that I joined the Libertarian Party. In between there, I had my own business in the strategic consulting business for financial institutions. And I worked for almost a decade in Washington, D.C., advocating for free markets in the financial services industries. So a lot of time had gone by. And finally, I just think that, the Republican Party and I fell out of love with each other. I just felt like the Republican Party had gone in a direction that didn't really align with my values as much as the Libertarian Party did.
I do wonder a little bit, looking back at those years from the perspective of someone who wasn't conscious enough to know what was going on at that time. Of course, that was when you saw, Ross Perot, that he was very big in the 92 election, right? And people say that Ross Perot, some people might say, stole votes from the Republican Party and cost them the election. Others might say that the Republican Party lost those votes because they broke promises like not raising taxes.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that certainly does seem like the last time they've ever allowed a third-party candidate to play any real role. I mean, Ross Perot was able to get up on the debate stage, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. Now, this is a guy who was a billionaire even at the, back in the days when $1 billion was a lot of money. He was able to fund his own campaign. He was double digits in the polls. He may have hit that magic 15% in the polling by then, which certainly until recently was considered a magic threshold. And so, he was legitimately able to generate quite a bit of enthusiasm. You're right. He was pulling support more away from Bush than from Clinton, but pulling support from both sides and support from people who didn't traditionally even participate in the political process. Good for him, right? Good for him. He was able to do it very, very legitimately. And it wasn't easy. It was a very, very expensive race. He was running ads. He was very aggressive with his messaging, which I applaud wholeheartedly. He was clear. He was crisp. I think he got a lot of things wrong as far as policy goes, but he was full-throated about it. He was not about free markets. He was a protectionist and didn't have a problem telling you so. But he did have anti-establishment instincts, had a lot of Trump in him, right? In any number of ways, including his personality and the way that he ran his business. He didn't have either the right team, the right message, or enough billions of dollars to get him over the finish line. But to your point, he disrupted that election significantly.
Yeah. And it certainly, as we've seen, you mentioned that magic 15% threshold. It seems to be, even when a candidate, whether it's an RFK or a Gary Johnson or anyone, kind of meets whatever the threshold is, suddenly the threshold changes.
As soon as you get close, the media hammers you.
Yeah.
And even when Perot was up there in double digits, they did start to hammer him. I mean, you really saw that play out, and RFK as well. Now, in RFK's case, you have to admit that he has helped them along a little bit, right? If you remember the media whose job it is to hammer Bobby Kennedy, you've gotten a few assists from Bobby lately. And, the bear story, the skeletons in the closet, and some of his positions that are not sort of internally consistent in foreign affairs, and how he wants to handle the bureaucratic swamp and things like this. He's given the media a little bit to work with.
Everyone always keeps attacking us in the Free State movement with this book, A Libertarian Walks into a Bear, which, by the way, I don't know if you've heard of it. For all who know it, totally discredited. There's no sign that libertarians contributed to a rise in bear population anywhere in New Hampshire. But we do know what happens when a Kennedy walks into a bear. He leaves it in Central Park. Anyway, so that'll take some of the attention off the libertarians. Maybe
I appreciate that very much, and good for you. And by the way, Eric, one of the things I find strangest about that story, first of all, the story itself is strange. We don't need to retell it. Your constituents can look it up if they haven't heard it. It is a strange story. But one of the things I find strange is that he's the one who told it. He's the one who tells it under no pressure whatsoever. He offered it up.
Well, I got the impression, I guess he framed it as though it was about to come out, and he was trying to give his version of it before.
Yeah, because he had told a buddy.
Oh.
And his buddy was apparently ratting him out on the bear story, or someone else. It reminds me, and now I have forgotten, bail me out here. Who was the politician who recently admitted to shooting one of her dogs?
Oh, that was the governor of South Dakota, Kristi Noem.
Kristi, thank you. I was going to say someone in your audience will bail me out there. It's not the story itself that I find strange. It's that she decided to tell the story, and just not having enough awareness. She's got plenty of self-awareness. I'm not even questioning the story, either from the aspect of the veracity of it or her judgment. I'm not going there. Just that she didn't recognize that a lot of people would be so fundamentally troubled by that, whether they should be or not, right? And that's one of the things I find so fascinating about Bobby, is that there just seems to be this feeling. I don't know where it comes. I've never been a Kennedy. Maybe you have. Yeah. I've never been a Kennedy, so
maybe in a past life.
Probably in a past life. By the way, the removal of the beard looks good. I forgot to tell you that.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate it. We'll see how others feel about it. My wife doesn't like change, so she'll get used to it. We'll see.
And then you'll grow it back, and that'll be new change. And
absolutely,
you can apologize for that all over again. Well, I've never been a Kennedy, I wonder whether being a Kennedy changes one's view of oneself, right?
Mm.
And the extent to which you can ride out these funny stories that, no one's really going to view you in an odd or negative light because they're going to immediately understand or immediately warm to your version.
Mike, I think we lost you there. Hopefully it's not my internet. Well, I think that we lost Mike. We'll get the connection up and going again. This is something that happens when we're doing it live. I will say while we wait for Mike. Oh, Mike, are you there?
I am. What happened? You disappeared on me.
I don't know if it was my internet or your internet. Either way, we're back together. So,
if it were me, I'm really sorry. I don't have any reason to believe that it was you. I don't have any reason to believe it was me.
Maybe it was the NSA wanting us not to have this conversation.
Well, if that's the case, then I definitely blame you.
Yeah. Well, all right. Well, so, all right. So we were talking about Kennedys and bears and all of that. By the way, I asked you about your other vice presidential rivals. I didn't ask you about was it
Kennedy's? Nicole Shanahan.
Nicole Shanahan. I remember her last name. I want to make sure it was Nicole. Nicole Shanahan.
Yep.
I'll say I've heard some interviews with her. I've been surprised that she's seems to have some sympathetic liberty positions, but like, what do you make of her? I don't know. Have you been following her much?
I think that's true. I haven't followed her a great deal. I have had the chance to speak with her. I met with her in Washington, had a nice, 15 minutes, I suppose. It is true that she's obviously articulate. She's obviously bright. She's obviously a very thoughtful person. I think anyone can see that immediately. What impressed me was exactly the same thing that impressed me when I met Bobby Kennedy, which is the extent to which she's quite down to earth. You don't get the same impression as when you meet some of these other pompous windbags. I won't name names. You can name almost any name you want. But these are people who are extraordinarily down to earth.
Yeah.
Just wanted to have a conversation, and I found that very, very refreshing, without any implication that, she was here to kick ass and take names, without any implication that she thought tremendously highly of herself. Nothing like that. She just felt like having a chit chat. And I was impressed by that. As a matter of fact, if I can jump in and mention the first time I met Mr. Kennedy, we served on this panel at the California Libertarian Party convention earlier this year. Mm-hmm. And he did something that I found absolutely extraordinary. I would go so far as to say unique from a politician, particularly in a political situation. We were having this conversation. It was a panel, right? Larry Sharp was the moderator. Some of your audience may know Larry, the great gubernatorial candidate in New York. Larry asked some question about the duopoly. It's not really important what the question is. Kennedy gives an answer about improving the duopoly somehow. We're going to work hard. We're going to force them to think differently, and things are going to get better. Something optimistic. It wasn't a horrible answer. It wasn't my answer. I thought it was fundamentally, the wrong answer. It was my turn to answer. I gave a different perspective, which is to say, I thought that having a duopolistic system was fundamentally problematic, and that if we didn't have more parties, we run the risk of increasing authoritarianism, not decreasing. Blah, blah, blah. It doesn't really matter what the questions or answers are. Here's the interesting thing. I get done with my answer. And by the way, nothing antagonistic. This was a perfectly pleasant discussion. He leans back in his chair so that he goes behind the panelist who's between us, right? And he looks over at me and he says, upon reflection, I think you're right. And he leans forward and changes his answer. And I thought, first of all, good for you for having the presence of mind, right?
Just to actually be listening in the first place and not just
to
waiting
be
for your turn to talk.
Even to be mentally there, right? And not just delivering talking points. And then to have the guts to change your mind in public in real time about anything. I almost felt like saying, Bobby, it's okay if I want to change my mind. You're a professional politician. You need to, you need to stick to your talking points, brother. What are you doing? I just found it absolutely fascinating that he was in no way committed to his own talking points. It's just, it absolutely blew me away.
Well, that is interesting. You don't see that very much, and I that certainly seems to me a positive quality, right? Someone who can change their own mind because what they've planned out ahead of time is something that they actually planned to say, and not something that someone scripted and handed to them. So if it's your own idea, you can change your mind, but it's hard to change the mind of the paper that someone handed to you, where you're like Kamala Harris, where you're just supposed to read whatever they put in front of you, and you can't do an unscripted interview because you can't operate without a script. We are coming up to the end of the hour. I do want to ask you on the Libertarian Party ticket, what do you see as kind of the best case scenario? What does a form of winning look like? Understanding, I think kind of we all know that kind of the track record of like winning the White House is not there for the LP, but there are many different ways to win.
That's not true, Eric. I think that Chase is likely the next president of the United States. And shame on you for talking about us as though, we're out of it. Polling shows that we're already, I don't know if you saw this actually, on a serious note.
Okay.
There was a poll 2 weeks ago that we did not pay for. Okay.
All right.
That put us at 4% in a bunch of states, including Pennsylvania. I found that fascinating.
Donald Trump was predicting only 3%.
Right. We've already got that beat. If we just add 1% every week from now on, we will blow away Ross Perot. So weird things do happen. Not that weird, perhaps. I think what success looks like is getting enough media attention. Chase is getting quite a bit of media attention now, by the way.
Good.
And I don't think it's as favorable as I wish it were. It's not as much as I wish it were, but it's more than it was 4 years ago. Fundraising has not gone well, but that's because the Libertarian Party has, had fissions and, sectionalism. And, we have structural reasons why a whole lot of people are mad at each other. I get all that. But never mind that. The media response has been, by and large, pretty good. Chase is getting his message out, and it is, by and large, well received. He's done a very good job with economic issues. He's done extremely well on issues surrounding foreign policy. And now, of course, we have trouble brewing in the Middle East, trouble brewing with Ukraine, particularly as now we're talking about an incursion into Russian territory. We always have problems with China regarding Taiwan, which seems backburnered right now in the eyes of the media. But anyway, this is a group of issues that plays into Chase's wheelhouse. And so that's actually gone, it's actually gone pretty well. He was actually in the Soho Forum a couple of nights ago and crushed Art Laffer in a debate over Donald Trump, which I found absolutely fascinating, that Chase would be able to do such a successful job in convincing people. Apparently 20 points, 20% of the audience flipped against the Donald based on whatever it was that Chase was selling that night. I was extremely impressed. So certain things have gone well. The messaging has been well received. I think in answer to your question, enough votes, enough media attention that the Republican Party and the Democratic Party each realize they must take our policies, our positions, our values, our ethics, our members, our voters into consideration. To your point earlier, to get people to do the right thing, at least to orient themselves in a more sympathetic fashion. That's what it's all about. That's what success looks like. I can't give you a number, right? It's not something that's very measurable. If there are certain statements that come out of the Republican or the Democratic nominees that hint at that, that would be terrific. But aside from that, I think it's just going to be a matter of, can we get a certain pile of votes that would at least imply that future politicians will have to take us into consideration. That's what success looks like.
All right. Well, Mike, we're out of time. Where can people follow you, find out more? Any final things to share on that regard?
Well, I'll be in Iowa and Wisconsin coming up. I'll be at the Iowa State Fair in a couple of days. I would like everyone to check out the websites. You can go to mytermaat.com, which is a little bit tricky to spell for everybody because there's 2 A's in ter Maat. But you can go, easier to spell is votechaseoliver.com. Go to either one of those 2 places. You can get involved. We're always looking for volunteers. We're not one of those campaigns with 1 billion volunteers. We're a campaign with hundreds of volunteers, which is terrific. But there's always room for a few folks that want to play a new role. We're also, by the way, Eric, and I know that you'll understand this, we are not one of those campaigns that's awash in funds. So if anyone has $50 that they would like to get rid of, go to either mytermaat.com or votechaseoliver.com and reach out directly to us. I would love to have a conversation with anyone who would like to discuss their role in the campaign.
All right. Awesome, Mike. Thank you for coming on. We hope to see you. We appreciated having you at PorcFest this year. Hope to see you at future events, and you're always welcome in the Free State, either to visit or if you convince your wife to make the move and come join us in the free society we're building. So
good luck,
Mike,
with all of that. You're doing a fantastic job. New Hampshire is lucky to have the Free State Project, and the Free State Project is lucky to have Eric Brakey.
Well, thank you, Mike. I appreciate it, and good talking with you this evening. All right, everyone. That's the show. Thank you for tuning in. We will be back again every Wednesday at 7 o'clock. I'll see you all next week. A reminder, again, September 1st, the Free State Blockchain Digital Asset Conference is coming up. You can get your ticket at blockchainnh.com. I will see you there. And in the meanwhile, we'll just keep fighting for liberty, fighting for a free state. And furthermore, my opinion is the Federal Reserve should be destroyed.